She woke with her cheek pressed against a stranger's shoulder, her resume creased between her fingers, and the quiet terror that followed felt louder than any scream. The train hummed beneath them, a low metallic pulse sliding through the night like a living thing. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, draining color from the world. Outside the window, the city slipped past in streaks of amber and black, buildings bending into shadows, time stretching thin. She inhaled sharply, heart pounding, and froze when the realization settled in. She was not alone. The man beside her hadn't moved. His shoulder was firm beneath her cheek, steady, unbothered. His suit, tailored, deep blue, carried the faint scent of cedar and something clean, expensive, unfamiliar. She straightened instantly, mortified, pulling away as if the contact had burned her skin. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely surviving the rattle of the train. He turned then, not startled, not annoyed, just present. His eyes were calm, assessing, a pale gray that seemed to notice everything without demanding anything in return. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, hair neatly combed, jaw shadowed with the fatigue of a long day. The kind of man who looked like he belonged anywhere he chose to stand. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You fell asleep." She nodded too quickly. Her fingers tightened around the papers she'd been holding like a shield. The top page had slipped, exposing the bold heading centered near the top. "Resume." She saw his gaze drop there, only for a second. Heat rushed to her face. "I didn't mean to," she added, because silence suddenly felt dangerous. I've been up since 4. Interviews." The word came out thin, almost apologetic. He glanced at his watch, then back at her. "That's a long day." She gave a humorless smile. "They all are." The train lurched as it slowed, metal screaming briefly against rails. A few passengers stood, gathering bags, their lives continuing forward without noticing the small, fragile moment unfolding between two strangers in a fluorescent-lit carriage. She tried to fold the resume, but the paper trembled in her hands. Ink smudges at the edges told a quiet story, cheap printing, revisions made late at night, hope rewritten again and again to sound employable. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Home," she said, then corrected herself. "Where I'm staying. Temporarily." The word tasted like failure. He nodded, as if the answer carried more weight than she intended. "Long commute. 2 buses and this train," she said. "It's cheaper." Of course it was cheaper. Everything she did had been filtered through cost for so long it had become instinct. Food, shoes, time, even sleep. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. She already knew what it would say. "Thank you for your interest. We've decided to move forward with other candidates." The message had repeated itself all day, wearing different company names like disguises. She stared down at the resume in her hands, at the neat bullet points that reduced her life to fragments. Education interrupted, experience patched together, skills polished to a shine they didn't quite possess. "I didn't mean to use you as a pillow," she said suddenly, because the humiliation had nowhere else to go. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile, something gentler. "I've been worse things than a pillow," he replied. She laughed before she could stop herself. A short, surprised sound that startled her as much as it did him. It felt strange, that laugh, like finding a light switch in a dark room and realizing it still worked. The train slowed again, approaching another station. The doors opened with a hiss. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and street food. A man argued loudly into his phone as he exited. A woman in heels checked her reflection in the darkened window. The stranger didn't move. Neither did she. "You look exhausted," he said, not as an observation, but as recognition. She swallowed. "I am." There was something in the way he didn't rush to fill the silence that made the truth spill out. "I had 3 interviews today," she continued. "One of them lasted 7 minutes. Another asked if I planned on getting married soon. The third, they liked me. I could tell, but they wanted someone who could start immediately. No questions, no complications." "And you?" he asked. "I'm all questions," she said softly. Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Not heavy, just present. The train picked up speed again, carrying them deeper into the night. He nodded toward the resume. "May I?" Her instinct was to pull it back. That paper was fragile, personal, proof of effort, proof of failure. But she hesitated. Then, against her better judgment, she handed it to him. He took it carefully, as if it were something that could tear. His eyes moved across the page, steady, unhurried. He didn't skim. He read. She watched his face, every flicker of expression feeling like judgment. "This is well written," he said after a moment. She blinked. "It is?" "Yes, honest. That's rare." Honest hadn't felt like a strength. It had felt like a risk. "I don't have much to offer," she said. "On paper." He looked up. On paper is a poor place to measure a person. She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever spoken to her as if she were more than a list of qualifications. "What do you want to do?" he asked. The question hit harder than she expected. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I used to. I wanted to work in community development, programs that actually help people. But those jobs want experience you can only get by already having the job." She shook her head. "So now I want stability. Rent I can pay without calculating every hour. Food I don't have to ration." He handed the resume back. Their fingers brushed. A small thing, but it lingered. "You're carrying a lot," he said. She looked away, embarrassed by the sudden sting behind her eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't usually talk this much." "Neither do I," he said. "But tonight feels different." The train plunged into a tunnel, darkness swallowing the windows. Their reflections floated faintly between them. Two faces framed by exhaustion and something quieter beneath it. She leaned back against the seat, suddenly aware of how heavy her body felt, how the day had stretched her thin. The adrenaline that had carried her from interview to interview drained away, leaving only bone-deep fatigue. "I should get off soon," she murmured, "before I miss my stop." He checked the route map above the door. "You have 3 stations." "Oh," she said, surprised. Relief and disappointment tangled in her chest. She closed her eyes for just a second. The train's rhythm wrapped around her, gentle and hypnotic. The seat was warmer than she expected. The stranger's presence, quiet, solid, anchored her in a way she hadn't felt in months. She tried to stay awake. She really did. But exhaustion doesn't ask permission. Her head tipped sideways again, slower this time, as if gravity itself had decided. Her temple brushed his shoulder. She stiffened, half awake, half dreaming. "It's okay," he said softly, before she could pull away. "You can rest." She wanted to argue, to apologize, to prove she wasn't careless. Instead, her grip on the resume loosened. The paper slid against his arm, coming to rest between them like a white flag. Her breathing evened out. The city roared on, unaware that something fragile and significant was unfolding in a train car after midnight. He stayed still, didn't adjust, didn't check his phone, didn't push her away. He looked down at the resume, at the name at the top, at a life compressed into margins and fonts. He noticed details others would miss. The volunteer work squeezed into a single line. The gaps explained without excuses. The quiet resilience threaded through every word. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against tunnel walls, a soft percussion echoing the train's pulse. He made a decision then, not dramatic, not loud, just certain. When the train slowed again, approaching her station, he didn't wake her right away. He let her sleep for one more breath, and then another. Because some lives change not in moments of chaos or triumph, but in the stillness between stations. When a tired girl with a folded resume trusts a stranger's shoulder, and he realizes he's been given something rare, an unguarded truth resting against him, waiting to be seen. And he gently lifted his hand, hesitated, and whispered her name as the train doors opened. and he gently lifted his hand, hesitated, and whispered her name as the train doors opened. She stirred, breath catching first, consciousness following a second later, like a tide pulling back from shore. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then widened as recognition rushed in. The hiss of the doors, the bite of cold air, platform lights sliding past the windows. Everything collided at once. Oh, she straightened abruptly, hair falling into her face. My stop. Yes, he said calmly. We're here. She scrambled to her feet, nearly dropping her resume. Her bag slipped from her shoulder, papers threatening to scatter across the train floor like spilled thoughts. He caught the edge of the folder before it fell, steadying it with a care that felt practiced, deliberate. Thank you, she said, flustered. I didn't mean to fall asleep again. I swear I'm not usually this. Tired? He offered. She released a breath that was half a laugh. Yes, that. The platform outside was nearly empty. Late hour, sparse footsteps echoing against concrete. The kind of station that felt temporary, like it existed only to move people through, rather than invite them to stay. She hovered at the door, unsure why leaving felt heavier than it should. He remained seated, posture relaxed, eyes following her without pressure. Well, she said, adjusting her bag strap. Thanks for being decent. He stood then, smooth, unhurried. I was getting off too. She blinked. You were? Yes. The answer surprised her more than it should have. She stepped onto the platform, the cold cutting through her thin coat immediately. He followed, the doors sliding shut behind them with a dull finality. The train pulled away, wind curling around their legs, carrying with it the faint warmth of shared space that was suddenly gone. They stood there for a moment, strangers again beneath harsh white lights. Do you live nearby? He asked. Not exactly, she said. I'm staying with a friend, just until I get back on my feet. He nodded. No pity, no questions that pressed too hard. Rain had followed them above ground. A fine drizzle slicked the pavement, reflecting the light in fractured gold. She hugged her coat tighter around herself, shivering. He noticed. Do you want company for the walk? He asked. At least until the street. She hesitated. Every instinct built over years of careful survival whispered warnings. Don't rely. Don't assume kindness means safety. But something about him felt contained, not demanding, not invasive. That would be nice, she said finally. They walked side by side, footsteps sinking without effort. The city at this hour felt different, quieter, stripped of performance. Closed shops, darkened windows. A lone cafe across the street still glowing, chairs stacked, one employee mopping slowly. So, he said, how did the interviews go, really? She considered lying, then didn't. I don't think I got any of them. I'm sorry. She shrugged, the motion practiced. It's all right. I've learned not to hope too loudly. That sounds exhausting. It is, she glanced at him. What about you? Long day? He paused before answering. Yes. She waited, curious. I run a company, he continued. Or several, depending on how you count. Days blur together. Meetings, decisions, consequences. She looked at him more closely now, the tailored suit making sense in context. You sound important. He smiled faintly. I sound busy. They reached the top of the station stairs. The street opened up. Empty sidewalks. Rain-dark asphalt. The distant hum of traffic somewhere far off. She stopped. This is fine. I can take it from here. He didn't move away right away. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded. Why are you still holding that resume? She looked down. The paper was wrinkled now, edges softened, ink slightly smudged from her grip. I guess because it's proof that I'm trying, that I didn't give up today. That matters, he said. Does it? She asked quietly. Sometimes it feels invisible. He studied her face, really looked, as if committing it to memory. Not always. They stood in the rain, neither in a hurry to end something they couldn't yet name. I'm Daniel, he said finally. She hesitated, then answered. Maya. Maya, he repeated, testing the sound of it. Thank you, she said again, softer this time. For earlier, for listening. Thank you, he replied, for trusting a stranger's shoulder. That made her smile. They parted then. No dramatic goodbye. Just a nod. A shared understanding that something unusual had passed between them, even if neither could explain it yet. She walked away, steps lighter than when she'd arrived. The rain didn't bother her as much now. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, but she ignored it, choosing instead to hold on to the quiet warmth that lingered from the train. Behind her, Daniel watched until she disappeared around the corner. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He stood still. He thought about the way she'd spoken about work, not with bitterness, but with weary clarity, about the resume that revealed more in its margins than most people offered in conversation, about the weight she carried so carefully it had nearly crushed her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone, scanned the platform number, the station name, Maya. That night, Maya sat on the edge of the borrowed bed, shoes still on, coat draped over a chair. The room was small, cluttered with someone else's life. Posters, books, laundry folded into uneven stacks. She stared at the resume in her hands, then slowly smoothed it flat. Her friend was already asleep. The apartment was quiet, except for the ticking of a cheap wall clock. She should have felt defeated. Instead, she felt paused, as if the day hadn't ended yet. She placed the resume on the nightstand, face down, and lay back, staring at the ceiling. Images replayed in fragments. The train lights, the calm gray eyes, the way he hadn't rushed to fill silence. She didn't know why it mattered, but it did. Across the city, Daniel stood in his kitchen, suit jacket removed, tie loosened. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline glittering with excess and certainty. He poured himself a glass of water, then forgot to drink it. He thought about the resumes crossing his desk every week. Perfect formatting, polished language, safe ambition. None of them looked like hers. He opened his laptop, pulled up a file he hadn't touched in years, a small internal initiative that had stalled. Community outreach, talent pipelines, opportunities overlooked because they didn't arrive dressed correctly. He reread the outline, made edits, deleted excuses. He didn't know exactly what he was doing yet, only that he couldn't ignore the feeling settling in his chest, steady, insistent. Not attraction, responsibility. Morning arrived too soon. Maya woke to sunlight cutting through the blinds, her phone vibrating insistently. She checked it, bracing herself. Another rejection, then another. She exhaled slowly, letting the disappointment pass through without taking root. She dressed quietly, folded her blanket, left a note of thanks for her friend. Outside, the city resumed its performance. People moving with purpose, coffee cups steaming, lives intersecting without touching. She headed to a cafe, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, and pulled out her resume again, making notes in the margins, adjusting wording, reframing experience. The work of hope disguised as practicality. Her phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. She frowned, hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Maya," a voice said. Her heart skipped. "Yes? This is Daniel, from the train." She stood so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Oh," she said, startled. "Hi. I'd hope this isn't intrusive," he continued. "I found your name on the resume. I didn't look for a number. This is a professional line." She glanced at the phone, pulse racing. "Okay. I was wondering," he said carefully, "if you'd be open to a conversation about work. No promises, no expectations. Just a conversation." Her mouth went dry. She stopped herself, forced a breath. Yes, I would." "Good," he said, "because I think your questions might be exactly what I've been missing." She closed her eyes, overwhelmed by a feeling she didn't dare name yet. When she opened them, the city looked different. Not kinder, but possible. And as she agreed to meet him later that afternoon, unaware of how deeply the path ahead would intertwine their lives, Daniel ended the call, staring out over the city he thought he controlled. Realizing for the first time in a long while that destiny doesn't always arrive through boardrooms or balance sheets, but sometimes through exhaustion, honesty, and a folded resume pressed gently against a stranger's shoulder. but sometimes through exhaustion, honesty, and a folded resume pressed gently against a stranger's shoulder. The cafe door chimed softly as Maya stepped inside, brushing rain from her coat even though the sky had cleared hours earlier. Her hands still trembled, not from cold, but from the strange gravity of the invitation that had followed her all afternoon. The air smelled of espresso and burnt sugar. Late sunlight spilled through tall windows, casting long shadows across worn wooden tables. She spotted him immediately. Daniel sat near the back, jacket folded neatly beside him, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest he was trying not to look like someone who never needed to try. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't working. He was simply there, waiting. That unsettled her more than anything else. She hesitated, then crossed the room. "Maya," he said, standing as she approached. "Daniel," she replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. They exchanged an awkward half-smile, the kind that acknowledges unfamiliar territory, without pretending comfort. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for asking," she said as she sat. Her resume rested in her bag like a silent witness. A server appeared. Orders were placed. Small talk filled the air briefly. The weather, the cafe, the noise level, each sentence a careful bridge laid across uncertainty. Then silence returned. Daniel folded his hands together. "I want to be clear before we begin. I'm not here to rescue you." She stiffened slightly, then relaxed as she heard the sincerity beneath his words. "I wouldn't want that," she said. "Good," he replied. "Neither would I." He took a breath. "I've spent years making decisions about people based on numbers. Productivity, efficiency, return. It works until it doesn't." She listened, chin resting lightly against her hand. "Last night," he continued, "you talked about community development, about systems that help but never seem to open their doors wide enough. That stayed with me." She blinked. "It did?" "Yes," he met her gaze, "because my company funds initiatives like that, or claims to, but we rarely listen to the people who actually understand the gaps." She frowned slightly. "I don't understand them. I just live in them." "That's exactly my point." Their coffee arrived. Steam curled upward, carrying warmth and possibility between them. "I'm building something new," Daniel said, quietly. "A program designed to bring in people who don't fit the usual mold. Paid training, real work, not charity." Her fingers tightened around her cup. "And you want me to, what?" she asked carefully. "Help me design it," he said, "from the inside, as someone who knows what these systems overlook." Her heart raced. "I don't have credentials for that." "You have experience," he said, "and perspective. Both are harder to teach." She looked away, overwhelmed. This wasn't an offer she could file neatly under opportunity or risk. It was something else entirely. "What's the catch?" she asked. "There isn't one," he said. "But there is responsibility. This would be work, hard work, and visibility. I won't pretend otherwise." She stared at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with her finger. Her mind raced ahead, assembling reasons to decline. Fear, imposter syndrome, the instinct to keep her head down. But beneath all of it, something quieter stirred. Hope. "When would this start?" she asked. "Immediately," he said, "if you wanted to." She swallowed. "I'd need stability, rent, health insurance." "You'd have both," he replied without hesitation. She laughed then, breathless, disbelieving. "This feels unreal." "It isn't," he said, "but it is new, for both of us." They talked for hours, not contracts or titles. Stories, her childhood, his first business failure. The moment she realized effort didn't guarantee security. The moment he realized success didn't guarantee meaning. The cafe emptied around them. Chairs stacked, lights dimmed. When they finally stood to leave, the city had shifted into evening again. "I need to think," Maya said, though her voice already knew the answer. Of course, Daniel said. Take all the time you need. They stepped outside together. The air was cool, the street alive with headlights and passing conversations. She turned to him. Why me? He didn't answer immediately. Because you didn't ask for anything, he said finally. You just showed up. And because when you fell asleep on my shoulder, you trusted me without knowing who I was. People rarely do that anymore. Her throat tightened. They parted again. This time with a promise not spoken, but felt. Days passed. Maya accepted. The office Daniel brought her to wasn't what she expected. No marble floors, no intimidating glass walls, just light, open tables, people talking, working, building. She was introduced not as a favor, but as a collaborator. At first, she doubted everything she said. Her ideas felt fragile, unpolished. But Daniel listened. So did the team. Her insights reshaped processes, changed hiring language, redirected funding toward access instead of optics. She worked longer hours than she ever had, but for the first time, exhaustion came with purpose. Daniel watched quietly as she grew into the space, confidence building layer by layer. He never hovered, never claimed credit. When others praised the changes, he redirected attention toward her. One evening, weeks later, they stood alone in the office, city lights flickering beyond the windows. You're good at this, he said. She shook her head, smiling softly. I'm just finally being heard. They stood in comfortable silence. Something unspoken hovered between them. Not rushed, not demanded. Connection. But neither crossed that line, not yet. Because what they were building mattered too much to risk confusing it with something else. And yet, as they left the office together, walking side by side into the night, Maya realized something had already changed. Not her job, not her circumstances, her sense of worth. And Daniel, locking the door behind them, understood that destiny doesn't always arrive as love at first sight, but sometimes as respect earned slowly, deliberately, until it becomes impossible to separate the work from the people doing it. And as he glanced at her, unaware of how deeply this partnership would soon test both their hearts, he smiled, not knowing that the final choice ahead would demand more courage than either of them had yet been asked to give. He smiled, not knowing that the final choice ahead would demand more courage than either of them had yet been asked to give. The pressure arrived quietly, the way storms often do before anyone thinks to look up. It began with meetings that grew sharper around the edges. Conversations that paused when Maya entered the room, then resumed with careful politeness. Emails marked urgent sent late at night. The program she had helped build was working too well. Applications poured in. Stories followed. People whose lives had stalled found doors opening where none had existed before. And with success came attention. Daniel felt it first. Board members began asking questions framed as compliments. Investors wanted numbers, projections, guarantees. They praised the initiative publicly, then privately suggested adjustments. Efficiency, scalability, risk management. Human variables are expensive. One of them said during a closed-door meeting, "We need structure, oversight." Daniel listened, jaw tight, hands folded. "What kind of oversight?" he asked. "Someone senior," another replied. "Someone who understands the brand, the optics." They didn't say her name. They didn't need to. That evening, Daniel stood alone in his office long after the building had emptied, city lights blinking like distant warnings. He replayed every conversation, every subtle shift. He knew what was coming before the words were ever spoken aloud. Across town, Maya sat at her desk, reviewing participant feedback, smiling at handwritten notes scanned into digital files. Gratitude, relief, stories that sounded too familiar. She didn't see the storm yet. She only felt a faint chill she couldn't explain. The request came the next morning. A meeting invitation. High priority. Limited attendance. Daniel read it once, then again. He closed his eyes. When Maya arrived at the boardroom, she sensed it immediately. The tension, the air sharpened with unspoken judgment. She took her seat, shoulders back, notes prepared. Daniel sat across from her, expression neutral, eyes steady but guarded. The presentation began. Slides, metrics, success rates. Then the pivot. A board member leaned forward. "We've been discussing leadership alignment," he said smoothly. "And while Maya's contributions are undeniable, we believe the program now requires more seasoned guidance." Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. "We propose," another continued, "that she transition into an advisory role. Supportive, non-executive. Advisory." The word landed like a door closing softly but permanently. She looked to Daniel. He didn't look away. "Explain," he said. The room filled with practiced language, experience, reputation, continuity. Someone who could represent the company, someone who wasn't her. Maya's hands clenched beneath the table. She said nothing, not because she had nothing to say, but because she recognized the moment for what it was, a test. Daniel stood slowly. "No," he said. The word cut clean through the room. Silence followed. "This program exists because it challenges the assumptions you're making right now," he continued, his voice calm but unyielding. "Removing the person who shaped it because she doesn't look the way leadership usually does would invalidate everything we've built." A murmur rippled around the table. "This isn't personal," someone said quickly. "It never is," Daniel replied. "Until it is." He looked at Maya then, really looked. "If this program fails under her leadership," he said, "that responsibility is mine. But if it succeeds, and it will, then the credit is hers." The meeting ended shortly after. No resolution, no agreement, just fault lines. In the hallway outside, Maya stood frozen, heart racing, breath shallow. Daniel approached her slowly, aware that anything he said next would matter more than any speech he'd given inside that room. "I should have warned you," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I knew this was possible." "But knowing isn't the same as facing it," he replied. She met his gaze, eyes bright but steady. "Are they going to force me out?" "They'll try," he said honestly. "And you? I won't let them." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. That night, Maya didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, the first place she'd ever rented alone, paid for with her own paycheck. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she stood to lose, and she thought about Daniel, about the line neither of them had crossed, about the trust that had grown quietly, deliberately. By morning, she'd made her decision. She arrived early, before anyone else, and waited in Daniel's office. When he walked in, surprised to see her there, she stood. "I need to say something," she began. He nodded. "Go ahead." "If this becomes a choice," she said carefully, "between me and your company, I don't want to be the reason you lose what you've built." His jaw tightened. "This company isn't what it is without you." "That may be true," she replied, "but power doesn't work that way. And I won't let them frame this as favoritism or emotion." He looked at her sharply. "Is that what you think this is?" She hesitated. "I think," she said slowly, "that something changed the night we met, and pretending it didn't would be dishonest." Silence stretched between them, raw and unguarded. "You matter to me," Daniel said finally, "but so does what we're doing." "Then let me leave on my own terms," she said. "Expand the program independently. Take it beyond this company." His breath caught. "You'd walk away?" "I'd move forward," she corrected. They stood there, rare and unguarded, the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. Daniel turned toward the window, the city sprawling beneath them. For years, he'd measured success in control, in scale, in staying untouched by risk. This was different. This required faith. He turned back to her. "I'll fund it," he said, "not as an owner, as a partner." Her eyes widened. "You'd step back?" she asked. "I'd step aside," he replied. "So it can grow without constraints, so you can lead without question." Emotion surged through her, sharp, overwhelming. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes," he said gently. "I do." The announcement came weeks later. A new foundation, independent, transparent. Maya named as director. Daniel resigned from his board seat the same day. The headlines buzzed. Speculation ran wild. They ignored it all. Months passed. The foundation grew, measured, intentional. People found opportunity where there had been none. Systems shifted. Lives changed. And slowly, carefully, in the quiet spaces between long days, something else unfolded. Not rushed. Not hidden, honest. One evening, after a late event, they stood together outside a community center, laughter still echoing from inside. "You know," Maya said softly, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For seeing me," she said. He smiled, that familiar, gentle curve. "You fell asleep on my shoulder. You made it impossible not to." She laughed, then grew serious. "And for changing my life." He shook his head. "You did that yourself." She stepped closer, rain beginning to fall again. Just like that first night. This time, she didn't lean by accident. This time, she chose. And when he wrapped his arm around her, steady, certain, it felt like coming home. Not to a place, not to a role, but to a truth they had both earned. Because destiny doesn't always arrive as rescue or romance. Sometimes it arrives as recognition, as respect, as the courage to choose each other without losing themselves. And somewhere in the city, a train rumbled through the night, carrying strangers toward moments they couldn't yet imagine. While two people, who had once shared nothing more than exhaustion and a folded resume, stood together in the rain, knowing with quiet certainty that what had begun between stations had finally found its destination.